Hello, welcome to another card making video. Today I'm back with a brand new video for my fave German shop, Moni's Bastelkiste. I will leave the link down below. She does ship worldwide. And I use stamps and dies by Lawn Fawn to create this glittery crafting scene card. As usual, I started by stamping out all of my images onto Trenzo-type perfect coloring paper, and I'm using my Copic markers to color them in. First, I'm using E50 markers for my mice. As you can see, I already colored a few of them, but I'm just showing you one as like a color reference example because I colored all of them the same way. I start out by using a little bit of the E57, then I'm blending that out with E55, being careful not to pull in the dark shade too far. Then I'm blending that out with E53, making sure to leave a little bit of room for a highlight shade. Adding some color on the cheeks and the insides of the ears and also on the belly with RV52. Again going over that with E53 and then blending it out with E51. Also adding a little bit of that on the belly. I knew I wanted to add lots of colorful little crafting elements, so I opted to color the furniture pretty neutral. So I'm using neutral grays for the cushion of the chairs and the sofa. I started with N3, but that wasn't quite dark enough to give me enough contrast. So now I'm going in with N5, just around the bottom where where the cushions would meet, just to give it a little bit of shading. Then again going over that with N3, pulling out the color a little bit further so that I end up with a light gray sofa in the end. Then I'm blending that out with N1, making sure I leave enough room for a highlight shade. Almost forgot the center cushion there. And then I'm going in with N0, just blending that out. And I accidentally actually ordered the neutral grays in the classic Copic marker version. So I'm just going over the areas where I use the N1 and N0 with the colorless blender because I find that the bullet nib is a little bit harder to blend, especially on larger areas. For the legs of the sofa, I'm also bringing in the N7, N5, and then N3 so that those are a little bit darker. And now it's already time to add some color to my accessories. I'm using RV17 and RV13. I gotta say, it's not my favorite pink combination, but for the purposes of this card, it worked. I actually, I'm showing the coloring before, but I actually did the ink blending of the floral background before, and I just looked for markers that would match the colors of the ink blending I did. So those worked. I wanted to have a little bit of differentiation between the mice and the furniture so that there are several brown shades, and I went with E70 markers. So I'm using E77, E74, E71, and E70. Just adding a little bit of shading. You really won't be seeing too much of that after I'm done adding all the elements anyway. I didn't really bother trying to add any wood grain pattern to the surface of the desk because I knew, or the table, because I knew there would be too much going on that there really was no point. Then for my yellow shades on the card, I'm using Y15, Y13, and Y11. Just making sure I have an even number of accessories colored in each of the colors. Then I also used the stenciling I did as a reference to pick my green color. So I went with YG17, YG13, and YG11. And then I also wanted to add in a little bit of blue. So I'm going in with BO2, blending that out with B00. And finally blending that out with B quadruple zero. That's a hard word. And I use the same neutral gray markers just to add a little bit of shading on the papers and the envelopes as well. Now I'm using the Spring Blossom stencils, which is a trio of stencils. And for the greenery, I'm using celery ink or celery stick. And the scallop panel I die cut with the scalloped rectangle stackables from Lawn Fawn. And the largest of those is actually larger than an A2 sized card. And there you can see the stencil won't quite reach the full width of the card. So I just added that, and then I'm just butting up the stencil against my previous stenciling and just adding a little bit of inking there. You may notice that I have a little bit of a score line on the bottom of that panel, but I knew I would be adding something over top, so it didn't really bother me. Now I just use the little laser cutouts or the lines on the stencil to line it up. And I'm using ballet slippers to add color to the second layer of the stencil. I'm trying to be mindful, especially there on the right side, that I wouldn't be ink blending anything over the edge that's not covered. I was kind of too lazy to mask that, but that would have been the smart choice. Just adding a light layer of color all over those little flower petals. And then I just lined up the third layer of flowers, and I'm using plastic flamingo ink to add color to those. And once I remove the stencil, I like the pattern, but the color was just way off. The plastic flamingo was way too bright pink to work with the pale other colors. So I'm just bringing in a little bit of wild rose from Lawn Fawn just to tone down the brightness of that pink, and that ended up working really, really well. Again, on the right side, being careful not to go over the edge of the stencil, and then just lining it up again for the right side of the panel. That was just slightly too large for the stencil. And there's my background. Callie from the Lawn Fawn design team actually showed this, I think when the last release came out. She just cut little strips of wood grain cardstock and ink blended those individually to create like a real wood looking flooring. And I love the way this looks, so I definitely wanted to try it. I will link to her Instagram down below. And I'm just using a little bit of dough ink on my white wood grain background to add the little floorboards. Then I used Henry's ABCs to spell the word glitter, and I ink blended those letters also with ballet slippers, plastic flamingo, and wild rose. And I die cut the letters from some fun foam as well, so that they would have some nice dimension on the card. And I just layered those two, the ink blended part and the fun foam with liquid glue. And now I just added the letters onto some post-it tape so that I could keep them in place. And I'm using a generous layer of crystal glaze or glossy accents, whatever you have on hand, both would work. And then I'm sprinkling in some Lawn Fawn Prisma glitter and some Lawn Fawn Chunky glitter. And I mean, the word says glitter, so it had to be sparkly. And I just love adding the glossy accents with the glitter. It's just such a fun effect, especially in person. It's super shiny and glittery, and I just love it. I could do it on every card. I also die cut some stitched rectangle frames to frame my little scene, and I wanted the floral background to be like a little bit of wallpaper in the background, but with all the elements it would have been just too crazy. So I added one layer of vellum, but that was still quite bright, so I just added a second layer of vellum to tone down the background. I also die cut two more of the rectangle frames to layer over top so that the framing of the card would have some nice dimension. And now it was time to add my little floorboards. I die cut them by hand, and so some of them are a little bit thicker than the others. So I'm just playing around with those like little puzzle pieces to make sure I have one row in all the same height. I had to snip off a little bit at the end of one row. And for my second row, I just snipped one of those in half so that there would be variation from each row. to the next so that they don't all have the same little gap, if you know what I mean. And I just repeated that for 5 rows so that I would have nice wood grain flooring. In the end, honestly, for this card, I could have skipped it because I added so many images that you can barely see the floor. But for another card, I love the effect and it's so, so pretty. I just love that idea by Callie. Like I said, I have it all linked below. I'm adding most of the images with liquid glue, just flat to the card, and there I accidentally dropped the mouse with liquid glue on the back on the vellum, but I just quickly wiped it away with a paper towel and it didn't even leave a residue, so crisis averted. And then I'm just adding the remaining furniture and all of the little crafty elements on the table and just all around the floor because, I mean, it's a crafty party. There will be stuff on the floor. I mean, when I'm crafting, there's usually stuff on the floor once I'm done. So I'm just adding, like I said, the furniture. I fumbled around with the placement of all of the images for a while, so I will just in a little bit skip ahead to the end of my adding the images because I simply just glued them down. And the 3 mice that are in the foreground or in the front of the card, I just added with some foam squares so that those would have a little bit of dimension. The one in the yellow dress, the one with the back and us, and the one on the stool is just added with a little bit of dimension. And I just moved them back and forth until I was happy with how it looked. Then I'm adding my letters to spell glitter onto the vellum, just with some liquid glue, and I'm using a ruler just to make sure that they're lined up nicely. And for the when in doubt, just add, I used the sentiment from the Just Add Glitter set, and I heat embossed that in white onto black cardstock and just added it flat to the background. Then I'm using for added sparkle because the glitter letters just weren't glittery enough apparently. I'm using the Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen in glitter gloss, and then I'm also, because that wasn't enough shimmer, it had to be glitter, so I'm also using my favorite Stardust Stickles to add even more shine. And that finishes off my card for today. I just love the background and the wood grain like flooring, even though you can barely tell, but I mean, I know it's there. And that won't be the last time I use this beautiful blossom background stencil. And that shine on the sentiment, oh my god, I want to glitter all the letters and everything. It's just so beautiful and sparkly, and the best part is it doesn't come off. Once it's dry in the like glossy accents, it's set in there and you won't have like glitter loose around on the card, which I love. Thank you so much for joining me today and for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will be back super soon with a new card video. Until then, have an amazing day. Bye!